Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
From Chandler, Arizona. He's got an awesome message for you, and he's going to continue to teach you on how to live the joy of living.
Thanks, Gloria. My name is Mike. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is April 23rd, 1985, and for that I'm grateful. Actually, I want to thank Chaz and the committee. I understand that I was a fill-in. They had someone else who couldn't make it, so he had called Dave, the gentleman who's doing the recording, and said, do you have anybody that maybe we could grab real quick? So Dave said, yeah, call Mike. And somebody asked me earlier if I'm nervous, and I said, no, I've got a pretty good idea what I'm going to say, and no one here has any idea what they're going to hear. So if anybody should be nervous, it's you and not me. Now, I gave you my sobriety date, and I did that because I got sober in Texas, and that's what they do there, and I've just continued to do that. But there was a meeting down there in one of the clubhouses one night, and they were going around the room, and this one said, I'm Dave, and I'm an alcoholic, and I haven't had a drink for this period of time. And Dorothy said, I'm Dorothy, and I'm an alcoholic, and I haven't had a drink for that period of time. And Tom says, I'm Tom, and I'm an alcoholic, and I haven't had a drink for this period of time. And Big Ed says, I'm Ed, I'm an alcoholic, and I haven't found it necessary to have a drink for 14 years, 6 months, 3 weeks, 2 days, and 8 hours. And David turned around and said, Ed, that's a lie. I saw you Saturday night, and you were so drunk you couldn't get down the street. He said, yeah, but it wasn't necessary. I'm convinced today as I stand here that every drink and everything else I did was necessary to get me to and keep me in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm grateful that they were here when I got here, and I know they were only here because of our traditions. And I'd like to take the next 2 hours and talk to you about the traditions. But that's not why they asked me here. They asked me to here to share in a general way what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today, and I'm going to try to do that. You know, one of the things I struggle with is when you get up here, your head's all full of all this stuff, and it's like, I know what to do. Well, I feel kind of like a mosquito in a nudist camp. I know what to do, I just don't know where to start. So I think what I'll do is I think I'll just share with you a few years ago, and I'm sure a lot of you can identify with this. I woke up one morning and I had a concern. And I laid in bed, and that's my friend Larry over there. Larry said, hey, you don't have to mention my name. And I said, oh, I won't. So I had this concern, and I laid in bed with this concern for a couple of minutes, and it turned into a problem. And nothing changed other than I thought about it. I laid there with my new problem, and I was thinking about that for a couple of minutes, and it turned into a crisis. Then I kept thinking about my new crisis, and I was immobilized. So I finally pulled myself out of bed and called my sponsor and said, I'm going to come and see you. So he and I went for breakfast. And we're sitting in a booth in Denny's, and I'm sharing with him my self-manufactured crisis that I just created. And he looks at me and he says, your life is in divine order, unfolding into goodness. And I thought maybe he didn't hear me. And So being a salesman, I kind of restructured my pitch, and I gave it to him from another angle. And I said, here's what's going on. And he looks at me and he says, your life is in divine order, unfolding into goodness. Now I'm looking to see if he's got his hearing aids in, okay? And I think he could see that I was puzzled by his response. And he said, Mike, if you go back through your life, if you go back through as far back as you can go, and you look at all the circumstances and events that have occurred that led you to where you are right now at this moment, and you're honest about it, you'll see how God has pulled a golden thread through each and every one of those circumstances that have led you here, right here at this moment. And I went home and I began to do that. I began to do some self-examination and look back through my life. And that's kind of what I want to share today, is some of the things that I discovered, some of the things that have happened since then, and how my life and the golden thread has worked for me. And more importantly than, hoping that maybe you can have some identity with that or identification, is that you'll take the time to look back through your life and see how God has pulled a golden thread through your life that has got you where you are today, right here in this room, right now. I grew up in an alcoholic home. My dad was an alcoholic. He was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He got sober when I was very young. I don't remember his drinking much. I remember some of the fighting and some of the early sobriety and things that went on in our house, some of the struggles that were going on. My own story, I don't know how it really was affected by my dad's alcoholism. I think that I just, from my first breath. It wasn't the day I was born, I remember I came out crying. It was just never right, okay? From my first breath, okay? When I was 7 years old, I lit the house on fire, okay? And I remember we grew up in a small town outside of Buffalo, New York. The house is burning. The neighbors are freaking out. The road is blocked off. The firemen are pounding the door in. They're running in with hoses. Everybody's going on. I'm sitting on the neighbor's porch. We had 7 kids in the family. Neighbors are all counting to see if there's any kids missing. And I'm sitting up there on the porch watching all of these events unfold. And there's only one thing going on in my head. And that is, there is no way I'm ever telling anybody that I did this. And up until this moment, I haven't. Now, actually, that's not true. I had many restless nights after that, many. And my mother was an Al-Anon. She passed away a couple of years ago at 48 years. And at that time, I remember I went to her because this secret was killing me. And I remember just finding the right moment and saying, I did it. And she said, what? I said, I burnt the house down. I lit the house on fire. And she said, oh, we knew that. I almost died of not sleeping, But very early, I began to keep secrets. I remember being on the main street of our town, going in a store, and there was something shiny, something I wanted. I took it. I didn't have money to pay for it. And, so that was my introduction to stealing. And there was some thrill about that I liked. It ignited something within me. I don't know what it was. I don't know if I was a kleptomaniac or a pyromaniac. But, my alcoholism began to manifest very, very early. And that wasn't what I was learning at home. And that wasn't what I was learning in the Catholic school. And that's not what I was being taught. But yet, it was the way I was beginning to behave. And I knew everything that I was doing equaled one thing, and that was I was a disappointment to everybody. I knew I was no good. I knew I couldn't measure up to them. I knew that I was a disappointment, and all of my behavior equaled that. And I really began to develop a very poor image of myself. Now, I want you to know my story's not real macho. You hear a lot of AA people get up behind the podium, and they got these amazing stories, And if I could have created my story differently, the SWAT team would have been there, it would have been cool. But it wasn't, okay? I started drinking very early at my brother's first communion. We went and took some beer out of the cooler. I don't remember getting drunk. I don't remember it hitting bottom and going up and a warm feeling. I don't remember any of it. What I do remember is I went back to the cooler, I stole some more, I hid it in the woods so I could have it the next day, and I didn't tell my brother. From the first time I drank, I was trying to figure out how I could do this. And I began to do it as often as I could. And when you're 8 years old, you're not really a daily drinker, okay? And you're certainly not a social drinker. I have never had a drink that I didn't drink for the effect produced by the alcohol. That was the only reason I've ever drank. Okay? It's the only reason I ever did any of the things that I did, any of the behaviors, any of the other things. It was only because of the effect produced by those things. So every opportunity I could, I drank, and I began to do it as regular as possible. If you invited me over to your house, I would be looking around to see if I could see a bar. I would say, hey, do your parents have any alcohol here? I was always looking for it. A lot of times we found it. I had older brothers. I could buy like a bottle of MD 2020 for I think about $1.55, and I could tip the guy that was buying it for me $1, and I would be drunk for, at least a day and a half on that. And so I never had problems getting alcohol. If we got together to play sports in the summertime in the backyard or anything like that, I would arrange that I could have alcohol because I wanted alcohol to be a part of everything that I did, because when I drank it, I knew that I could do everything better. And that's why I drank. I drank because it made me feel better. I drank because I could forget my secrets. And I drank because it helped me to perform. It helped me to fit in. It helped me to feel comfortable in my own skin. That recipe led me to, by the time I was ready to enter high school, it wouldn't be uncommon at all to find me sitting in the park at night by myself drinking whatever I could get. That was where, before I went to high school, that's where I was reduced to. I entered high school. I found some other chemicals that they wouldn't smell on my breath. I was doing that. And, my story is this. My first detox was in Children's Hospital. You can't be real macho with that story, okay? I mean, here I am. I'm in Children's Hospital for 9 days. My dad and his sponsor and other members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to visit me. They made a lot of suggestions. They didn't put me in intensive care, and they didn't have a detox center at Children's Hospital yet. But the AAs came in to see me. They extended that same hand of kindness and consideration that was extended to every single person in this room. And they said things like, we'd like you to come to AA. And somebody suggested that I go to counseling, so I started there. And I really liked counseling, because after a couple of weeks, the counselor and I were smoking weed together. And, I'd say to my parents, is it Tuesday yet? I was looking for the next opportunity to go to counseling. Okay? And I remember I went to my first AA meeting in the bottom of the police station in Orchard Park, New York. It was on a Friday night. It was a hillbilly group. They had low ceilings and long wooden tables. The room was full of smoke. There were donuts on the table and hot coffee and people there to greet you when you came in. And they said, hi, welcome. And I went in, I sat down, and I was with my dad and his sponsor. And they went around the room that night and introduced themselves, and it came to me. And I said, I'm Mike, and I'm a problem drinker with alcoholic tendencies. I've later identified why I said that. It wasn't because I wanted to be clever or cute. It was because I didn't want to be an alcoholic. And I also knew that if I identified it as an alcoholic, then it was going to be expected of me to stop drinking. And I was 15 years old. It was 1974, and I wasn't interested in stopping drinking because stopping drinking seemed like such a long time. I mean, all my life, they would say, oh, kid, it's just a day at a time. And I would think, you guys are old, and you've been not drinking for a long time. And I just could not conceive that. It was just way over my head. And the other things they said in the meetings were over my head, too. They said things like, it's the first drink that gets you drunk. And I'm like, really? You guys call yourself alcoholic? Right? And I remember debating with my dad and saying, why would you even say that? It's stupid. I've never gotten drunk from the first drink. And he'd say things to me like, if you were going to get killed by a train, would it be the engine that killed you or the caboose? I'd go, why am I on the train track? I needed more information. I wish I could tell you that that led to sobriety at that time, but it didn't. And the people in Alcoholics Anonymous loved me then and welcomed me. One of the miracles of Alcoholics Anonymous in my life was that they said, keep coming back. And I did. And for the next 10 years, I came to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous on a regular basis, and I never got 30 continuous days of sobriety. I was in and out. I was in hospital after hospital, detox center after detox center, psychiatric hospitals. You know, when I was gone, I remember one time the girl was doing an intake at the psych hospital, and she's asking me questions, and I'm trying to convince her that a life with me would be a good move on her part. I think somebody needed to talk to me about step 2 then, but I wasn't ready. You know, I continued to drink, and the things that they told me in the meetings began to happen into my life, and I'm not going to share all of the blow-by-blow descriptions of the things I did. I can tell you this: I was a taker, I was a thief. I did things that today, looking back on it, it's just unimaginable. But that was where my alcoholism took me. And when I was finally done, the only solution for me, because I would go to the meetings, I would sit in the meetings because I thought. And that's something else about our stories, because we were talking a few minutes ago about some stuff that was written in the big book, and I said, well, that was, Bill's interpretation of his story. And I think that when we get up here to speak, or we're in a meeting and we share our experience, we're giving our version of what we think happened to us. Okay? But if you ask our children or our wives or our parents, you're going to get a completely different version. Okay? And I want to make sure that I always remember that everything that I share is really my version of the events as I see them. But when it got to the bottom, I would go to these meetings, and somehow I thought what I was hearing was, you don't drink, and then you come to AA meetings, and then you feel good, and you're happy, and you get jobs, you get girlfriends, you get your life back. You get little medallions. You get cakes and prizes and awards and parades and all kinds of stuff. All you do is don't drink and go to the meetings. And I wouldn't drink and go to the meetings. I'd be sitting in the meeting trying to figure out how I could kill myself. Because not drinking never worked for me. Not drinking and not using never worked for me. It always made me sicker. I never got better by not drinking. I always got sicker. And my only solution after a period of time was to drink again. And I'd go back out, and every time I'd go back out, it wasn't what I wanted. And I would feel more of a disappointment, more of a failure. I'd come in, and I know people were saying, he doesn't really want this deal. No, hey, listen, don't give him any money, okay? He's not here for the right reason. Keep the girls away from him, okay? He doesn't really want it. I want you to know that I believe in my heart of hearts that I wanted it just as bad then as I do today. I just didn't know what it was that I wanted. I thought that it was not drinking. I didn't realize that drinking wasn't my problem. If drinking was my problem, if I stopped drinking, I would have been fine. The problem my problem was a spiritual malady. My problem was a sickness that alcohol was helping me to treat, and then it stopped working. And when it stopped working and I stopped drinking, I had no solution. So the only answer I had was to either commit suicide or to drink and use again. That was it. I had no other choice. It wasn't because I didn't want it. And I want you to know, if you're someone who's struggled getting sober, let this be your first time. Hang in there. Get in the middle of this thing. Understand that Alcoholics Anonymous is in this book right here. This is where Alcoholics Anonymous is. Our meetings are fellowship. Our meetings are where we share together our encouragement, our strength, and our hope. In here is a design for living for an alcoholic to go through a process that in the end will give them a joy of living unfamiliar to them. We could never capture the joy of living out there doing what we did that we can get in here, but how can we help someone to understand that the only way they can ever experience it is by taking the actions necessary to produce those results. If it could be done intellectually, the doctors would be making billions of dollars treating alcoholics today, okay? But the success rate is so poor in the medical profession because the identification process isn't there that we have. So April 1985, I just burned my life to the ground. I was done. I'd been coming to AA for 10 years. I was sick. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Any good thing that ever happened in my life, I blew. I remember graduating high school. I'm walking across the stage. I got my family out there. It's a proud moment. And before I got my diploma in my hand, someone yells out one of my nicknames, and that was drugs. I don't know where they got it. But again, I knew I was just a disappointment and an embarrassment to everybody that loved me. I knew that I was a failure at everything that I did. Anything good was no good because I blew it and I knew it. Might as well just die. I finally got the courage to do it. I broke into a guy's house because I knew he had a gun. I went through the house and I couldn't find his gun. And early that morning, the next morning, I'm looking out the window and I see these three ladies walking down the street. It may have been a hallucination. I have no idea. They were wearing funny church hats, and for some reason, I remembered my grandmother when I was growing up would come to the house after church on Sundays with her friends, and they would be wearing the same type of funny church hats. So I thought of the God of my childhood. And I got down on my knees that morning in that room, and I said the same prayer that every single one of you has said, and that's just, God help me. Now, when Bill Wilson was in Towns Hospital for his last time, he cried out like a child, "If there's a God, show himself." And he said the room lit up a bright white light. He felt as though he was on a mountaintop and could feel the breeze of the Spirit blowing through and through, and he had been released. That did not happen to me. I drank all the rest of that day. And that night, I called the only person left that I thought might be willing to talk to me. It was my dad. He asked where I was, and he agreed to meet me the next day. And the next day, he and another member of Alcoholics Anonymous met me in a diner. That was a 12-step call. Wasn't the first one. I hope it was the last one. We talked about my options, and I didn't have any. I was out of options. A couple days later, my dad came up with the idea of calling a friend of his, Big John, down in Brownwood, Texas. And he calls John and he says, "John, we got Mike here and we don't know what to do with him. He's at the end." And John said, "Send him down here for a couple of weeks. We'll see if he wants this deal." John always called AA the deal. I arrived in Abilene, Texas. And I was picked up at the airport by 3 a.m. members, John and two of his friends. They took me to a meeting. Now looking back, they always came in teams to get me, okay? Because I'd disappear. They took me to a meeting. The meeting was basically uneventful. After the meeting, we went back to John's one-bedroom apartment. John was a big guy. He was an attorney, former boxer. He had been sober for a long time. His sobriety date was October 28th, 1951. John's sponsor was a guy named Dick, and Dick's sobriety date was September of 41, and Dick's sponsor was Bill W. So John that night was pacing, and I'm sitting on his couch in his little one-bedroom apartment. And he looks down at me and he says, "Kid, how long you been around the deal?" With as much ego as you can have, when everything you own is in a cardboard box. You're wearing someone else's pants and you weigh 90 pounds. I said, "About 10 years. And he said, "I don't know if you've got the guts it takes to make it, But if you do, we can show you by living proof how you never have to live that way again. And if you want to get sober, I'll go to hell and back with you. And if you don't, you can go to hell alone. I was waiting for Welcome to Texas. You know, it seems to me in my memory as I look back through my life as I was doing that, it seems that a lot of these events happened all that night, okay? All that first night. Now, I know that they happened over a period of weeks and months, but it seems like it was all that night. I remember him saying, "You are nothing but a thief. You're a thief of the worst kind. Because you stole from those you love the most their right to happiness." See, I was a taker. And I would say, oh, the only one I'm hurting is me. You see, my intentions are good. If you just give me a job, help me out, give me a place to live, give me a few dollars, help bandage me up this time, it's going to be different next time, you'll see that. You are nothing but a thief because you stole from those you love the most their right to happiness. It was as if he walked into the cave of darkness where I was by myself. He grabbed me by the hand and began to lead me out to the sunlight of the Spirit. And he had the ability to do that because it was one alcoholic carrying a message of hope that had depth and weight to another alcoholic who was suffering the same thing we do today, and hopefully we will continue to do when we leave here. Because that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is. See, he began to share his life with me. He began to take me around. Someone talked about the road trips. I think it was Michael. I'm pretty safe saying Michael about the speakers here, okay? Because, I mean, what the heck, you know? I think it was Michael that said about these long road trips, okay? Well, Big John would travel all over the country and Canada and Europe speaking at AA conferences, and he would have me drive for him. And we'd be driving down the road. We might be going to Canada or to Arizona or wherever. And John would have his stack of books, and we'd have our stack of tapes, okay? And we'd be listening to the tapes, and he'd be reading out of the books. And he'd be quizzing me. He wanted me to learn about Alcoholics Anonymous history. And he'd begin quizzing me, and he'd say, "What's Dr. Bob's address, kid?" And I never knew why I was learning those things, and later in my story I'll share a little bit about why I think that happened. One of the early things in my sobriety was he brought me over to his friend Bill O'Neill's. Bill had the Midwest Tape Library, Bill in Arbutus, and Bill got sober October 21st of 1951, and John got sober October 28th. So Bill had 1 week on John, and he never let him forget it, okay? And we'd go over to the library, and we'd sit at the little kitchen table, and we'd drink instant coffee. And these guys would talk to me about Sam Shoemaker and Father Ed Dowling and Bill and Lois and Smitty and a lot of the early history and the pioneers and the people that they knew. And I was really being indoctrinated with all of this information. And Bill had this library, the Midwest Tape Library. It was the largest AA tape library in the world. Okay? And it was all on reel-to-reel tapes. And this guy went out and he did what Dave's doing at this conference. He provided a service. And please support, the guys who come and provide that service. Even if you're not going to listen to the CDs yourself, buy a set of CDs and give them to your sponsees, or give them to somebody in a treatment center or a halfway house or something, because the messages that are I think more is caught than taught. Okay? I don't think Alcoholics Anonymous is a structured program where we teach people. I think it's a program where we share with others our experience, and that's why it's so effective. So do that. But John and I would go in there every day, and we would listen. And one day, Smitty was there, Dr. Bob's son. And Smitty, I had been sober a little while, and Smitty said, "Mike, has Bill or John told you about the first guy that my dad," that being Dr. Bob and Bill W., worked with? And I'm like, yeah, Bill D., Akron City Hospital, AA number 3. His story's in the big book. And Smitty says, well, there was another guy before Bill D. His name was Eddie R. And Eddie was a crazy drunk. He was bad. I mean, he would escape from the house, and he would go out and he would get drunk, and Dr. Bob and Bill would just go to try to find Eddie and bring him back and get him sober and start all over again. And he said one day Eddie decided he would chase Dr. Bob's wife Ann around the house with a butcher knife. So the first guy that Bill and Dr. Bob tried to work with had to be committed. So really, you would think that Eddie probably felt like a failure. Maybe Bill did after working 6 months with alcoholics, and then he gets Dr. Bob, and the first guy they try to carry the message to has to be committed. They probably felt like a failure, but they didn't stop. They went on, and they saw AA number 3, Bill D., and AA began. 15 years, Smitty says to me, the story doesn't end there. 15 years later, at my dad's funeral, a guy came up to me and extended his hand and said, "Do you know who I am?" And Smitty looked at him and said, "You're Eddie." Eddie said, "I've been sober for 2.5 years." Told him where his home group was. Now that message might not mean a lot to a lot of people, but it means a lot to me because we're asked to try to carry the message. We're not asked to get the result. And Dr. Bobman did exactly that. They tried to carry the message to this guy, and God did the work, and later Eddie got back to AA, got sober, and stayed sober the rest of his life. That was the day that I knew I was home in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I knew Alcoholics Anonymous, right at that moment, I understood something about AA I never knew before, and that was AA wasn't about being successful. AA wasn't handed down a story of success. AA was a story of one failed attempt after another, and people slowly began to get better, and as a result of it, it was guys like Eddie and guys like Bill D. and Big John and Bill O'Neill and guys like me and men and women like you that made AA work. And I knew I was home. So I'm grateful for the experience of the knowledge of some of our history. You know, I started trying to read the big book. And John says, I went through the book and I said to him, I read the big book. And he said, so what? He says, I read Moby Dick and I don't remember any of it. He says, you got to study that book. And we began to study the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got to this part in a doctor's opinion, it talked about a psychic change. I'm 25 years old, and I think, wow, man, that's cool. I want a psychic change. Could you pour me a little of that? I want a psychic change. And then right after that, it says the only thing necessary is follow some simple rules. So I had to begin to look at adapting some of the processes of Alcoholics Anonymous into my life as rules. I began to do things over and over, things I didn't want to do. Most of the things I did in early sobriety were things I did not want to do. By doing the things I did not want to do, I was then able to do the things I wanted to do. Big John was great at giving directions. He would say, kid, would you do me a favor? And I'd say, sure. Could you make me breakfast today? I'd say, yeah, sure. He said, can you make eggs and make sure there's some yolk on them? And I'd fry these eggs up, and there'd be flames flying in the kitchen and stuff. And I'd put them on the table. He'd brag about me for the whole day. This kid's a cook. He makes me the best breakfasts in the world. And then he said one day, he said, will you make me some spaghetti and meatballs? And do you think you could make the meatballs round? Well, I grew up in Buffalo. Okay, I make a snowball better than anybody in this room. Okay. And I said, sure, I'll try that. So I got a half a pound of hamburger, a loaf of bread, and a dozen eggs, and I made these white meatballs. And I fried them in bacon grease, okay? And then I put them in a jar of ragu. I was afraid to eat it. I got 2 weeks of compliments, okay? He was not only going around telling everybody that I was the best cook he's ever had, he was calling them on the telephone to tell them that I was the best cook that he ever had. See, what he did is he took somebody who was broken. He took somebody who was empty. He took someone who would cheer up this room by leaving, okay? I was one of these guys that somebody licked all the red off my candy, okay? I was empty. He began to give me little things to do. Then he paid attention, and he saw that I was doing them. Then he encouraged me to continue to do it. Kid, tonight you're going to stand at the door and greet people when they get here. I'd stand at the door and greet people. Remember one day AJ comes in. How you doing, AJ? He says, fantastic. What? He's got this big smile, golden tan, white hair, old timer, fantastic. I said, do you really mean that? Because I thought he was on pills. Yes, and it keeps getting better. And I want you to know I left that meeting that night and I thought, I want to try to be a little bit more like AJ. I'm going to start, when people start asking me how I'm doing, instead of looking down and telling them I'm not doing very good and I feel like this or I feel like that, I'm going to try to be a little bit more like AJ. I'm going to say I'm doing good and it's getting better. I didn't have that smile because my teeth were all rotted and all that, but it took a long time for that stuff. It's incremental. We get better incrementally, a little bit at a time. But I began to say that, and I remember one night a lady came into the clubhouse and I said hello, and she said hello, and she asked me how I was doing, and I said, I'm doing good, it's getting better. And she leans over and she kind of grabs me and gives me a little nudge and pulls me close and says, just wait for the pink cloud to lift. I wish she'd walk in here right now. Because I want you to know that was 30 years ago. And I don't think my life is a pink cloud, but I think, as Howard said, my life is in divine order and it's unfolding into goodness. I have an amazing life today. I have such an abundant life today. So many things have happened to me. So much goodness has been extended to me as a result of exercising the principles of this program in my life one day at a time and trying to share that with others, that I just to think about it puts me to tears. I so often am just in awe of everything that I get to see. Because what Howard was really saying when he said your life is unfolding into goodness is pay attention to the evidence of your own experience and you can trust that things are going to be good. That was what he was really saying. And life comes at us. It doesn't stop because we come to Alcoholics Anonymous and get sober. Life continues to come at us. Sometimes that's not the things that we want. Sometimes it's exactly what we want. I went bankrupt in Alcoholics Anonymous and had to start over again. I mean, I've had the experiences that we all have. I remember in 1987, I went to stay with Big John for 2 weeks. I stayed for 2 years. He had a one-bedroom apartment. He gave me the bedroom. When my phone rings, when somebody needs help, and I think I'm too busy, I think I'm too important, I think I've got too many other things to do, I better remember the sacrifices and the inconveniences that these guys did so I could get sober. And that's what I remember. And I know that sometimes I need to inconvenience myself so somebody else can have the same break, the same opportunity, the same chance, the same kindness that was extended to me that I can hopefully extend to them and lift them up. Now, if shut up and listen worked, I'd have gotten sober when I was 6. Okay? I needed love, tolerance, encouragement. I needed somebody to lift me up like Big John was doing. I needed some guidance and some direction and some patience and tolerance, and he extended all of that to me. Well, I went off to Arizona because it was just time. I got to Arizona. I was working, I live in Chandler, but I was working in a construction company because I was unemployable. And I was carrying drywall in July as a laborer. And on a weekend off, I was out by the pool, and this girl dove in the water. And I dove in after her. And she said her name was Joy. And I thought, I need more joy in my life. I told her I'm Mike and I'm an alcoholic. We went out on a date 4 months later, we were married. That was 28 years in December. Now, she got a fortune cookie on our first date. It said something like, "You can trust the man you're with, his love is true." How does that happen? That's almost like divine order unfolding into goodness, you know. I want you to know, I don't know how to set it up to have a successful marriage, okay? I just know what you taught me. And I just try to do that one day at a time. I understand, because I know the traditions of our program, that if our AA group is going to survive, it's going to be because I have to sacrifice my desire to have my way so that Alcoholics Anonymous can keep going forward. And if I'm going to have a relationship with my wife and I'm going to have a healthy marriage, I have to learn to sacrifice my desire to have my way so we can have unity in our home. The principles of Alcoholics Anonymous are the foundation of my life, the bedrock from which I build a happy and joyous and free life. I had gotten back from a business trip, and I was out in the garage. And all of a sudden, I hear all this noise, and I look behind my shoulder, and I see all these police officers running at me. And I run in the house as quick as I can, and they're yelling out one of my kids' names, and the next thing you know, I'm on the floor in handcuffs in my own house with 27 years sober. Now, the thought that's going through my mind is, your life is in divine order, unfolding into goodness, okay? Man. Now, I'm not going to tell you his story, but I will tell you that the members of Alcoholics Anonymous surrounded him like a blanket. They offered to him what was freely offered to you and to me. And today, he's 3.5 years sober. He's working with a lot of young people. My house is constantly filled with young people and all areas of sobriety, okay? I mean, it's like growing up in my house when I was a little kid. We would grow up, I mean, there was always drunks in our house, okay? We'd come home from school. They're sitting there smoking, drinking coffee, eating donuts, waiting for dinner. We get up in the morning. They're sitting there shaking. The police would drop people off. I mean, it was just constant alcoholics. You know, one day my mom loved to tell the story that one guy he was there, and he's shaking, he's really bad, and it's early in the morning, and the kids are getting ready for school, and he's, "Oh, this is horrible," and he's, "Oh, I'm so embarrassed, oh, I'm so ashamed, oh, I can't believe it." And finally, my little sister, who was about 7, looks at him and says, "Hey, we've seen way worse than you." That's ego deflation at depth, folks. You know, I was one of these guys, I'm going to get even. I'll get even with those people that did this to me because I was a victim. You know what that is. I was a victim. It was somebody else's fault that I was in the trouble and that this happened. And finally, Big John said, "Kid, if you're going to get even with someone, why don't you try to get even with someone that's been good to you?" That's why when Chaz called me on the phone, I said, "Yes, I'll be there." Because one day at a time, I'd like to try to get even with the people that have been good to me. I was down in Myrtle Beach. I was doing something like this. It was actually at a young people's thing. I don't know if you guys have ever gone to any young people's conferences, okay? But it's like they do some stuff interactive, okay? And it's like, I remember the first time, like, well, I don't think I like this. And I went up to my room and I meditated on it. And I thought, what would Bill and Big John and Bill W. and Dr. Bob and these guys say if they saw 500 kids down there interactively doing how it works, drinking their Red Bull, hugging each other, sharing a message of hope with each other? I knew what they'd say. They'd say, "Keep trying to carry the message to that sick, suffering alcoholic. Good job. Keep it up." That hit me. I needed to have that happen. But anyway, while I was there, This guy comes up to me, he was my host, and he had written a movie and some books, and in conversation he said, we ought to write a book together sometime. And that'd be like Bob saying to me, hey, next time you're in town, let's play golf. Okay? And I said, yeah, fine. So about a year later, my phone rings, and it's Bill, and he says, are you still interested in writing a book? Now, this is the same guy that got that diploma that he didn't deserve. Okay? And I said, yes. And he said, great, would it be all right with you if I talk to the publisher and see if they'd be interested in publishing it? And I said, yeah, that'd be fine. So he calls me a couple of weeks later and he says, hey, the publisher is excited. They really want us to do the book. Would it be all right if I had my attorney negotiate the terms of the contract? I'm like, you're doing pretty good so far. Yeah. Go ahead. Long story short, a couple weeks later, I get a check in the mail. I hadn't written a word. Tell me AA doesn't work. Okay? Now I want you to know, I'm thinking the whole time, your life's in divine order unfolding. I'm scared, man. I don't know what to do. Anytime I have to do something I've never done, I have a little bit of fear. And I think that's the message that Howard was sharing with me was, again, look at the evidence of your own experience. All the things you've ever been afraid of have never happened, and what did happen was generally the best possible outcome. So trust that it's going to continue to be good. Trust in God's unfolding goodness. And that's what I did with that book. And it was about 10 months later, after the book was published, I get a call from Hazelden, the publisher, and they say, would you be willing to write another book, this time on your own? And I said, sure. And then I did 2 more books. I wrote 4 books in 2 years. Okay? I'm not a writer. I'm a storyteller. And all I did was compile information and show up because that's what you taught me to do. You taught me to show up. Trust. Live by the teachings and the philosophies of Alcoholics Anonymous. Start my day asking my higher power, how can I serve thee? What can I do today for the man who still suffers? What can I do today? You know, in our 3rd step prayer, talks about overcoming the difficulties. And I hope when someone sees me and gets to experience part of my life, I hope they look at me and they say, it's as if he doesn't have any difficulties. And the reason I want it to look that way is because there's a God, a loving God, working in my life today. I don't have difficulties or unresolved circumstances. I have opportunities for growth. And I get to use those. And I'm so grateful for what we have. I'm going to start winding it up here. It's kind of getting late in the afternoon. And a few years ago, a little less than 3 years ago, my oldest brother was 59 at the time. His wife had passed away 2 years before that. She was 54. She died of lung cancer, and 2 months after she passed away, he was also diagnosed with lung cancer. Now, he was getting to the end of his life, and I decided that I would go visit him because I felt like it was the right thing to do. So I called him and told him I was going to come to town. I'd visit him. I'd see my mom and my family, and everything would be good. And I had a pretty good idea it'd be the last time that I saw him. So he called me a few weeks later. I was actually on vacation, and he called me up and he said, "Where are you staying?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to stay at Mom's house." And I didn't want to be a burden on him. And then in the conversation, I could tell he was uncomfortable with that. So I hung up the phone, and then I realized that I needed to deal with this now. So I called him back, and I said, "Listen, were you thinking that maybe I'd stay with you?" And he says, "Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking." And he said, "And I'll pick you up at the airport." And I'm like, "All right, I'll do that." So I went and I stayed with him. Now, before I left, I did not know, I had no clue how I was going to deal with this relationship. What do you say? And I got there, and it came to me. and that was to help him go back through his life and see how he could look at all the circumstances and events that had occurred to where he was at that moment, and he could see how God was pulling a golden thread through his life. We were able to successfully do that. We had an amazing time. I left. 15 days later, he passed away. I went back for his funeral. I was honored to give his eulogy. I spent some time with my mother. Before I left, I could tell that she wasn't feeling very well. Thought maybe she was just worn down from all the events that had just happened. She had taken a little bit of, she had taken sick, but nothing alarming. Week and a half later, one of my brothers showed up and she wasn't doing very good, suggested they take her to the hospital, took her in, admitted her in the hospital. And over the next 2 weeks, her body slowly shut down. The morning before she passed away, she woke up and she said, "I want Mike here." So my brother and sister immediately called me. Now, I would have been there, but I did not want to communicate a message that she wasn't going to make it. And I also knew I had no unfinished business with her because we were on solid ground. So I got a plane ticket and I headed back there. And in my mind, I'm wondering, why does she want me there? We're good. We got this thing. And I got there and I went in her room. And it's midnight and the room is filled with life. It's filled with her children and her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren, and they're all there. And she sits up and we held hands and we prayed together. And everyone left and I got to visit with her. And when I left that room, I knew she did not ask me to be there for her. She knew what Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me. She knew that I could be there for someone else. She knew that this program enabled her son to get up, stand up, and stay up. She knew that I could help anybody who might be having some challenges with those circumstances and events. And I was able to give the eulogy of her at her service, 48 years in Al-Anon, a life of service. And she passed away, and the cause of death is simple. Her job was done. That's why she died. Her job was done. And I look at what we have today. Our job's not done. Dr. Bob, at his last talk, was given at the convention in July in 1950 in Cleveland, Ohio. And during that talk, he said, if you simmered Alcoholics Anonymous down to just two things, you'd have love and service. Service is that giving of ourselves to others without expectation of reward. And love is the spirit. Howard gave a talk one night, and he said if everybody in the room loved him, he wouldn't feel it. But if he loved everybody in the room, he'd have to feel every bit of it. So the love that I have today is only the love that I can give away, and that's the way that it expands in my life. A bell is not a bell until we ring it. A song is not a song until we sing it. Love is not put in our hearts to stay. Love is only love when we give it away. Alcoholics Anonymous is only Alcoholics Anonymous when we give it away. God bless you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.